Good afternoon, Dave.
Is it afternoon? Do I say that every time?
I feel like we say the same thing every time.
I
It's
know
like
it's boring.
I say hello, you have a bad joke,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get into it.
Yeah. Okay. No bad jokes this time.
No, no bad jokes.
Too late.
You can end with a bad joke.
Okay.
Well, hey, welcome back. We did take a little bit of a break, I guess. We posted an Easter sermon that you gave in 2017 at Church of the Open Door, which
It was so weird.
surprisingly,
It was so
yeah,
weird to watch. Anyway, it's
mostly
fine.
because you really needed a haircut.
Okay. Anyway,
I can't be the only one that thought that.
well, what I thought was I loved Easter's, and that was an interesting one in that it tied in. I mean, I think you found it and were surprised yourself at how much it tied into what we've been talking about. I just wanted to throw up an Easter sermon because we didn't have a talk to do here. So I hope
Don't
people
give
listen.
away our secret.
Yeah, right, right. I hope people listen to it because it did tie in, but yeah. Bonnie and I were in tears, just remembering Open Door and just remembering that stuff. So that was fun.
Yeah,
Yep.
I agree. Well, we're back and we are recording another episode of What in God's Name is Going On. We've been dealing over the last 3 weeks or talking about the issue of identity and mission as God's people and how historically the people of God would forget not only their identity as a people of God, but also their mission. And we've spent so many episodes talking about how those two things just are not one and the same, but coincide together. And
Right.
you can't really have one without the other when
Right.
you're talking about God's people. So we talked about being the body of Christ, showing up as Christ in the world, that we are the physical manifestation of Christ. And you called it the incarnational presence of Christ in the
Right.
world. And we're going to talk more about that
That's
today.
identity. That's all about identity. That's who we are.
And it's also about mission,
Absolutely.
which is, as you say, why we're here. But lately, we've mostly been focusing on mission, which on some level is continuing to do with what Jesus did, which was reveal the face of God to his people, to make tangible the love of God, as you say, and to make knowable the love of God to the
Mhm.
people who don't know God in
Right.
the world.
And could
But
I add one thing? Let me add
yeah,
one. What's going through my mind is John 1, where it says that the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. We got to see who God really was through Christ, but he was revealing himself to people who thought they knew God. So that's just another spin because I just think that's still true. There's people who we sometimes think we know. No, we don't always know. And that's why people do things in God's name that is weird. I'm sorry, interrupted, Cole.
no,
I thought it
that's we could have had like a whole talk on what you
on
just
that.
said, because if we want to talk about, we're going to get way off subject here, aren't we? I'm going to go back to my notes because what we're
Would you
talking
do
about today,
that? Okay.
Jesus said, 28 and Acts 1, right? I want you to go beyond, is what he said. And
Also,
beyond, I've heard you refer to, Dave, as the friendly confines, which is an obvious reference to our favorite baseball team and Wrigley Field and the
mhm.
Chicago Cubs.
Known
In
as the
fact,
friendly.
known as the friendly confines. In fact, on our family chat, we were, it was all Cubs chatter yesterday and pictures of Wrigley Field the day before. So this is as good a place as any. I can tell you're just itching to jump in. You have so much to say
Yeah.
about Wrigley Field and how it relates to the Great Commission.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible how somebody can relate the friendly confines of Wrigley Field to the Great Commission?
How we
And I
know
do
you're a
remember.
great speaker.
Well, thank you. But I do remember doing that, and the whole point was that the friendly confines were kind of like a metaphor to the fact that the call of God on the people of God, particularly at Pentecost and beyond. So this applies to the church. Has always been outward. It's always been out there beyond is the key word, beyond the friendly confines. Oh, we're home. The friendly confines of what is familiar and what is safe, and what is known to us. So beyond Jerusalem and Judea, which are both familiar and safe to first century Jews, I want you to go beyond all of that, beyond Jerusalem in particular, because in Jerusalem, metaphorically speaking and culturally speaking, there was a way in which everybody in Jerusalem, all the Jews anyway, went to synagogue. We all go to synagogue on the same day, in the same way, singing the same songs and praying the same prayers and praying the same prayers the same way. But the word of Jesus to his church, just before the ascension, just before the filling of the Spirit in Pentecost, was I want you to go beyond that familiar place and kind of safe place into places like Samaria, which is neither familiar nor safe, because nobody in Samaria goes to synagogue. I mean, none of my neighbors go to church anymore. They used to, but they don't anymore. I'm going to get to that at the end of the talk, and now I'm spoiling the joke because I think it's Samaria now. But in Samaria, no one goes to synagogue. Jerusalem, everybody did. They don't speak the same language. In Samaria, they don't eat the same food. And I'm not just talking physical food. I'm talking spiritual. They don't devour the same things. They don't have appetites that are consistent with what a Torah observant Jew or a good Christian would have. They don't listen to the same music. They don't believe the same God at all. So why would I go there? That's not a comfortable place for me to go, which means, among other things, if he's calling us to places like that, the people who live in Samaria, and now I'm tying it to some prior episodes, they're not going to come to us. They're not interested in synagogue. They're not interested in going to church. So Jesus is saying in the Great Commission, I want you to go to them as the incarnational presence of Christ, not just with a message, but with a life in God, so that you can reveal to them the reality of Christ, the love of Christ, the life of Christ to people who don't know Christ. A couple of things there to note, just real quickly before we move on. That most of the people, I remember really having not an epiphany, but a strong sense of this when we were going through Acts, that when Jesus gave the Great Commission, all authority has been given to me, I now give it to you, I want you to go. Everybody who was hearing him give that, commissioning, that order to go, said, yes, I will go. And I think they meant it. Like you said yes, and I say yes. And if I feel prompting from God, we generally say yes, but the actual going and doing of what we just said yes we would do and where we would go rarely happens easily, and it rarely happens quickly, sometimes not even voluntarily. It took 13 years. I remember, as long as I've been in the ministry, it's so weird going through Acts, realize it took 13 years after Pentecost, before they left Jerusalem. So they didn't just go, and they didn't go voluntarily. And it wasn't because they were evil. It wasn't because they were callous. It wasn't because they didn't care. It was because I think they were human, and I think there's something for us to relate to there. I take great comfort in the fact that even the disciples, all full of the Spirit, were going to go, but nobody went. 13 years they didn't go. And what it took was kind of a push. What it really was a shove. In fact, if you remember the sequence of Acts, it wasn't in Acts chapter 8. What it took was a persecution. And it was when Saul at the time began ravaging the churches. And so all of a sudden, the people in Israel, the believers in Israel are going. They're going, not because they wanted to, not because they were responding to a call. They were going because they were running for their lives. And now they were going beyond what was safe, not because, again, they had planned to, but they were forced to. After 13 years, they were scattered throughout all of Judea and even in Samaria. And then in Acts chapter 8, I think it's verse 9, we find Philip. He's the first name that's mentioned who's in Samaria, and there they are 13 years later. One little quick note, Acts chapter 8, verse 1, when the whole church is scattered and everybody leaves Jerusalem, and now they're finally going. And by the way, when Philip gets to Samaria, it says he starts to proclaim the good news of God. So it wasn't just going and living there. They were proclaiming the good news of God. They were on mission, begrudging, but they were on mission. But in chapter 8, verse 1, when this persecution happened and everybody left except for the apostles, which is very weird. Like, why did they stay back? And there's a lot of theories about that. I think one of the reasons, and this is just a maybe in my mind, is that this movement that God has called us to and is always outward, it's always out there, beyond the friendly confines of what is familiar. I think very subtly, the apostles not going when the persecution happened is a message that says this going thing is not just for a select few. Mm-hmm. It's because the apostles are the ones who should go, right? The missionaries and the vocational ministry people who really are doing the ministry, they're the ones who should go. I don't know that it's intentional, but I remember picking up this weird sense that it was really significant that the massive people who were now going were ordinary believers and followers of Jesus, ordinary people engaging the culture in ordinary ways, not by gaining political power. They had no political power, but by living their lives in Christ in a very foreign and hostile place. Kind of sounds like home. Okay, thank you. I'll be here all week. But they were out there in Samaria because the movement has always been out there, which brings us now, let me just kind of catch you up in my ADD way to Philip. So the church has been dispersed. The apostles stayed back. And the first name we hear about is Philip, Acts chapter 8, verse 5, who went down to Samaria. And when he went down, he began to proclaim the good news of God. But again, Samaria is not a place you want to go. No one takes their vacation there. You don't get brochures of, well, Samaria, they got a nice beach. No, you don't go there for a weekend getaway with your wife. Because beyond the fact that Samaria was literally a dangerous place to go, it was also weird. It was just plain weird. And I'm not making this up. Again, this is nothing I remember about going through Acts and coming to Acts chapter 8 and going, these are some weird dudes. First person we meet was Simon the sorcerer. That guy wasn't in Jerusalem. He didn't go to my synagogue, right? He wasn't welcome in my Baptist church. Simon the sorcerer was the first guy that Philip meets. And you got to just be thinking whatever else. I'm not in Kansas anymore. We're not in a city that is familiar, a culture that I know, a language that I speak. These guys go to a different church. They live a different way. Simon, chapter 8, verse 9, was called a sorcerer, proficient in the magic arts. He was called the great power of God, and people ate it up. This Simon the sorcerer was really popular. Masses of people would come and listen to him speak or watch him do his deal. When the church and Philip and his group kind of showed up, they noticed this guy. And why wouldn't they be all enthralled with this Simon guy? Because you're in Samaria. And in Samaria, anything goes. The latest thing is the best thing. And he was putting on quite a show. So it's a different city. Again, this is a different culture. They have a different way, a different food. Again, spiritually, even a different food. We're not in Kansas. And then the next person we meet in Acts chapter 8 in Samaria, it's in the same context of Samaria anyway, is this Ethiopian eunuch. So we got Simon the sorcerer, who's weird. And that would be one reason not to go to Samaria, because I don't want to talk. Okay. And then the next person that shows up in Acts 8:26 is the Ethiopian eunuch. Mm-hmm. Philip met him on the road to Gaza. And this eunuch guy is not a guy that Philip would choose to hang out with. He wouldn't call him on Friday night and go, dude, want to watch a movie? Wouldn't be doing that. He would not be, more importantly, he would not be a guy your synagogue would approve of. Church would not be happy if you were hanging out with this Ethiopian eunuch guy. He was, according to verse 27, the court official of Candace, who was the queen of the Ethiopians. So he was kind of high up in the order of things. He was in charge of all of her treasure. And the story is fascinating because he's riding in a chariot, but it's not a chariot like Ben-Hur, he's in a chariot and a horse. It's a box with a seat in the center of it, and it had two poles, and then 4 people were carrying him. So you picture this 4 people carrying this guy. So he's a big deal, kind of a big deal, working for the queen, and but he's Ethiopian. So all of a sudden you have a racial component. You can ignore it if you want, but you can't. He's an Ethiopian eunuch, so he's a black guy. That's what we got. And if we already know what Torah observant Jews thought of Gentiles. They're okay. They're not. So all by itself, there's that. You got a racial thing going on, and a little tiny, matter is that he's a eunuch. And why is that there? Why is it in? Why? Too much information. By the way, he had his buzz gone. I'm sorry. That wasn't the original Greek.
I was just going to ask if that was original Greek.
No, but literally what we know about him historically, particularly because of his position, he was ceremonially castrated. And because he was part of this particular temple as an Ethiopian, if he's working for the queen in this capacity, it would have been about that. So he's part of pagan worship. And this I remember the first time I went into this, I thought, this is gender stuff. It's not a perfect parallel, but the Bible tells us the guy was a eunuch. He was castrated. His masculineness has been rejected by him. It's as close as you can get, I think, to a transgender idea issue, if you will. So whatever else, this guy's out there. This guy is like, we're not in Kansas anymore. He didn't go to my synagogue. This guy didn't. He wouldn't have been allowed in my synagogue. That makes it a little contemporary. Wouldn't have been allowed to come to our church kind of thing. But so he's out there, but in Matthew 28, that's where Jesus said, I want you to go beyond what's familiar and safe and what is comfortable. I want you to go to even places like Samaria. Some thoughts about this, given our culture and that issue of transgender, LGBTQ, all of that stuff. And I'm not going to go way deep into it, but this is like a little seed for thought. Think about Philip for a minute, okay? We know that he's a follower of Jesus, but we also know, just historically, because of where he would have been in his life, he was a Torah observant Jew. People who became followers of Jesus who were Jews did not quit being Jewish. They were followers of Jesus who were Jews. So he's a Torah observant Jew. And I think you can assume that, having grown up that way, and even assume some good things about growing up that way, that he had some opinions about whether it was okay to be castrated or not, or to be a eunuch or not, or to do that in the temple or whatever thing that was connected to, that someone like that was unclean. And Jews, we do know historically that eunuchs were, like Gentiles, they were unclean. In fact, it's weird because this eunuch was on his way to the temple, which he would have never gotten into. He was not allowed to go there, and assume that Philip might have had opinions about whether it was okay to be castrated or not. He might have an opinion. I don't think you should do that. Okay. But what's interesting, and let's assume he didn't change his mind after he meets this guy. He doesn't go, oh, I guess it is okay to do that. Let's just say he didn't change his mind about that. But in verse 29, it says that the Spirit said to Philip, I want you to go up to his chariot. What? This is breaking all the rules. I would never do that. I want you to go up to the chariot. And when he does, he finds the guy reading from Isaiah. And then it says he got into the chariot with this eunuch and begins to explain from the scriptures the ways of Jesus. And then you know the rest of the story. This guy wants to get baptized, and Peter or Philip baptizes him. And my thought about that when it's applied to all of the turmoil that we're in around that kind of thing, and I know I'm not hitting every angle on this because I am tired of having certain things rammed down our throats, like you have to accept this kind of thing. But as followers of Jesus who live in Samaria, where this stuff is normal, my question is, like Philip, what if you didn't change your mind about that? But why aren't we in the chariot? Philip got in the chariot. Whether he changed his mind about whether it was okay or not, I'm assuming he didn't change his mind.
Sure.
I still think it's wrong. But I'm getting in the chariot with that guy. And that's a couple of weeks ago episodes, we talked about a different spirit. That's a different spirit.
Yeah.
I don't know what Philip would have done before he became a follower of Jesus, but my guess is he would have run as far as he could the other way if he saw someone like this coming down the road. And this time he listened to the Spirit, got into the chariot. That's a fascinating metaphor for me. I think about it every time I think about this issue. You don't have to agree. You don't have. You can have. Well, let's have our debate. Let's ask our questions. But why are we in the chariot? And that's a good thing to think about. Next, chapter 9. So we've got the Ethiopian eunuch. We've got the Simon, the sorcerer, who's a whack job. In chapter 9, the Spirit says to Ananias, who's a prophet, I want you to go, Ananias, to the street called Straight and meet with a guy named Saul of Tarsus. And Saul became Paul, and so we think Paul's great, but Ananias is going, you got to be kidding me. He's causing all sorts of trouble. He's the source of most of our pain. He's the one who created this whole persecution. And then the Spirit says to Ananias, I want you to go to Saul of Tarsus because he's going to bring my name to the Gentiles. And now we got the Gentiles. Okay, so you got Saul of Tarsus. I don't want to see him because he kills people like me. And he's going to be used by my Spirit to bring Gentiles who, just like everybody else in Samaria, don't go to church. They don't read the Bible. They speak a different language. They live a different way. They are unclean. They make you unclean if you get anywhere near them. This is a messy chapter. One of my favorite stories around this whole thing is in Acts chapter 10. I don't have time to unpack it, but some of you maybe have heard me preach this, and maybe even just what I have here is enough. It's where Peter and Cornelius meet, and Peter gets this really scary dream of all these animals that are unclean coming down. It's a vision, but he gets it 3 times. So I see it as a nightmare, and it's scaring the bejesus out of him because that's what it took to get Peter to get over his prejudice. There's just no way of going to a Gentile's house. And so he gets this vision 3 times, and the Spirit finally gets through to Peter, who's a blockhead, and he goes. What's fascinating about the story is that happens in chapter 10, I think. In chapter 9, the Spirit of God is already talking to Cornelius. Cornelius gets a word from God before Peter gives in and says, yeah, I'll go to his house and talk to him, even though he's a Gentile. It's very fascinating and I think intentional that the Spirit of God is clearly at work in people out there who live in Samaria. And I want you to go to these people who make you uncomfortable, Peter. So Peter went, and I called that the title of that sermon, I called it The Tale of Two Conversions. One was Cornelius, the other conversion was Peter, and Peter's was tougher because he had so much prejudice about whether he should go be in a Gentile's house. In fact, when he goes to the Gentile's house, he says to Cornelius, even you yourself know how unbelievable it is that I, a Jew, am here with you, a scummy Gentile. And it's just like, are you kidding me? You didn't go to Evangelism Explosion because you're not supposed to say that. Anyway, 2 things to close. That while in Acts chapter 8, the first century church went to Samaria, they had to go to Samaria. They were forced to go, but they had to go. They had to leave Jerusalem to go to this foreign place. And the reason I'm bringing that up as one of my final thoughts, just to think about, is this, that we don't have to go anywhere to be in Samaria. We're already there. We already live in Samaria. And yeah, I did a series of talks off of that, living in Samaria, what it's like to live in Samaria, because that's where we live. That's what America is. This Christian nation, baloney. It's Samaria. We live in Samaria. It's Babylon is where we live. So we're already there. We don't have to go. And what the energy for followers of Jesus is should we go to Samaria over there into that bad neighborhood? We already live in Samaria. So how do we learn to live in Samaria? And how do we, while we're living in Samaria, not isolate ourselves from it, but provide an alternative to life in Samaria? Second thing is that if we're really interested in providing an alternative to life in Samaria, we need to discern what are the false gods of Samaria that we may be even bowing down to. Because if we're bowing down to them too, if we're serving the false gods that Samaria serves, good luck sharing the gospel, because we're just like everybody else. And the three primary gods of Samaria, same is true of Babylon. I'm going to unpack that maybe in some future episodes as a metaphor, or Babylon being a metaphor of empire, which is what we are. Rome was the same kind of thing. The three primary false gods are money, sex, and power. And I think the next one I want to get into, because it really ties in with this, what in God's name is going on right now, is when we use power to do what we think is God's bidding, we absolutely destroy whatever testimony we have. So I think that's what we're going to get into after that. One more picture just to leave you with. And I've said this in previous episodes, that it all started with God, who sent his son, his one and only son, and he sent his son into Samaria, into the world, not to condemn the world, but to reconcile it. Because he kind of understood that, you know what, the people aren't coming my way. I don't care how attractional I am, how cool a song I make, the connection there. We talked about the attractional church model. I don't care how attractional. They're not coming my way. I'm going there. I'm going to go their way. And so the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the second thing was he sent his son. And the second thing was then his son in John 17 said in this prayer that in the same way that the Father sent me, I'm now sending you. I want you to go and be my body in that place, the incarnational presence of myself in that place, to be the kind of people who are revealing the face of God, making tangible the love of God, making accessible the life of God by reflecting the character of God to people who don't know God. And it all began in the beginning with this breath. In the garden, it was the breath of God. And we walked with God in the cool of the day, and the breathing was easy, and then we forgot how to breathe. Now I'm telling the whole story. And he came with his breath again in Ezekiel 37 with the dry bones, and the breath of God came, and we came to life. And he came again at Pentecost when the breath of God blew. The Holy Spirit brought dead people spiritually alive, and here we are alive in Christ. So I want you to go beyond what's safe and secure, what's easy, the friendly confines, and what's known. And don't beat them up, and make sure you get your way. Reveal to them the surrender of God, the love of God, the life of God. Be the incarnational presence of God in that place. That's all I got.
It seems so easy.
No, it doesn't seem easy to me, but the story tracks.
Yeah. Maybe easy is not the right word. Simple, and we make it so complicated.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes.
Coming back to what we say all the time, from the beginning, we're in good company. We forget.
Hmm.
We forget who's where. We forget why we're here, and then we're in exile. From the beginning of these episodes, I think the church is in exile right now.
Yeah.
And this is all about, a pastor's heart saying, we need to remember this stuff. That sounds so simple. It's
Yeah.
not simple at all. It is
Yeah.
clear, though. It is clear. Yeah.
It
Anyway.
is clear. That's a
Yep.
perfect spot to, I mean, we have ended, but that's a perfect way to to wrap it all up. It is so clear. And the church, the Big C church as a whole makes it so muddy and overcomplicates it and tries to make it flashy and sparkly. And it just is so clear. God makes it so clear
Yep.
throughout the Gospels and his story what we are to do
Yep.
and what is so hard for us to do. It's not easy.
No, no. And who we are to be and out of the be. Yeah. It's all connected. There we go again. Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm. I'll never forget. I can't even. Oh, it was Jill Briscoe. I heard Jill Briscoe speak once, and she was talking about God calling her and what it was like for her to live out just this. I mean, she has an incredible story. If you don't know who she is, Google her and read all of her things and listen to anything she's ever spoken at.
yeah, I agree.
But she talked about her own revelation, and she kept saying it was, yes, Lord, send her. So that's how I always feel when I think about saying yes to God. That is my classic. Like, yes, Lord, but send someone else.
Yeah.
They should do that.
Yeah. I got kids. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Whatever.
busy. I got
I'm busy.
emails to send, and
Yeah.
so, well, thanks for continuing to share your heart for this incarnational model, this place of clarity that God is calling each one of us to, and challenging our own thoughts about what it looks like to live out the mission of God in our just everyday lives. We don't have to go anywhere. We don't
No.
have to make it complicated. Just show up.
Yeah.
All right. Till next time, Dave. See everyone.
Thanks a lot, Annika. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.